The most dangerous thing a person can do in this world is to look at someone who has nothing and see only a reflection of themselves. Elowyn Hartwell had learned this lesson at the age of 12 when she watched her father die in the muddy yard of a landlord who had refused to hear his pleas. The landlord had looked at her father, a man who had worked from dawn until dusk for 20 years and had seen nothing worth saving. No history, no dignity, no humanity, just another poor soul begging for mercy that would never come. She had been standing behind the gate, her small fingers wrapped around the cold iron bars, when her father had collapsed to his knees. His voice had cracked as he begged for more time, for just one more week to pay the rent that had been unfairly raised. The landlord had laughed, actually laughed, and then he had ordered his men to drag her father away. 2 days later, her father was dead. Not from the beating, though that had been cruel enough, but from the shame, the humiliation of kneeling before a man who saw him as less than a dog, the knowledge that he could not protect his children, could not provide for them, could not keep the roof over their heads. Elowyn had watched the light leave his eyes, and something had died inside her too. But something else had been born in that moment, a quiet, stubborn refusal to ever become like the people who had destroyed her family. A determination to see the humanity in others, even when the rest of the world refused to see it. A belief that kindness was not something you gave only to those who could repay you, but something you gave because it was the only thing that separated you from the monsters. 7 years later, Elowyn Hartwell was a maid at Evermont Manor, one of the grandest estates in the kingdom of Eldoria. She worked from before dawn until well past dusk, her hands rough from scrubbing floors, and her back perpetually aching from carrying heavy buckets of water. She slept in a tiny attic room that was cold in winter and stifling in summer. She ate plain bread and watered-down soup, while the aristocrats above her feasted on roasted meats and rich pastries. And yet, she would not have traded her life for theirs, because Elowyn had seen what wealth did to people. It did not make them better. It made them worse. It made them forget what it was like to be hungry. It made them forget that the servants who polished their silver and cleaned their chamber pots were human beings with families and dreams and fears. It made them forget that kindness was not a transaction, but a necessity. She knew this because she saw it every single day. She saw the way the upper servants sneered at the lower ones. She saw the way the steward, Lord Cedric Vane, treated the tenants on the estate as if they were livestock to be milked for every last coin. She saw the way the wealthier families looked at the poor who gathered at the gates, hoping for scraps from the kitchen. She saw the way people measured worth by the cut of a coat or the shine of a shoe. She hated it. She hated it, with a quiet, burning intensity that she kept hidden beneath her placid servant's smile. But she had also learned something else over the years. She had learned that sometimes the people who seemed the most powerful were actually the most trapped. That wealth could be a cage as surely as poverty could. That the aristocrats who looked down on everyone else were often the loneliest people in the world, surrounded by sycophants and liars who would never tell them the truth. She had learned that everyone, no matter how high or low, had secrets. And she had learned that the best way to survive was to keep her head down, do her work, and never, ever draw attention to herself. That was, until the day a beggar collapsed in the rain outside the servants' quarters. The afternoon had been gray and miserable, the kind of day that seemed to seep into your bones and make you forget what warmth felt like. The sky had opened up just before noon, unleashing a torrent of rain that turned the paths to mud and sent everyone scurrying for cover. Elowyn had been in the kitchens when the storm hit, helping the cook prepare the evening meal for the manor's many guests. The Duke was hosting a party. Not just any party, but one of the grandest affairs of the season. The great hall had been decorated with hundreds of candles, and more flowers than Eowyn had ever seen in her life. The finest musicians had been brought in from the capital. The menus had been planned for weeks. Every servant in the manor had been running themselves ragged to ensure everything was perfect. And the Duke himself? Eowyn had never met him. Few of the lower servants had. The Duke of Evermont was a distant figure, a man who moved through the manor like a ghost, rarely seen, and never spoken to by anyone below the rank of butler. She had heard whispers about him, of course. The servants' quarters were a hotbed of gossip, and Eowyn had learned to listen without participating. The rumors painted a confusing picture. Some said the Duke was a cold, heartless man who cared only for his own pleasures. Others said he was barely ever at the manor, preferring to spend his time in the capital or on his other estates. A few whispered that he was kind, but that his kindness had been exploited by those around him, leaving him wary and distant. Eowyn didn't know what to believe. All she knew was that the Duke's presence had thrown the entire household into chaos, and that chaos meant more work for everyone, including her. She had been carrying a heavy load of firewood from the storage shed when she first noticed the figure huddled by the wall near the servants' entrance. She nearly didn't see him at all. He was so still, so utterly motionless, that he could have been mistaken for a pile of discarded rags. It was only when she stepped closer that she realized it was a man. He was slumped against the wet stone wall, his head bowed, his body trembling with cold. His clothes were filthy, torn in several places, and so thin that she could see the bones of his shoulders through them. His hair, dark and matted, hung over his face, hiding his features. He was soaked to the bone, and even from a few feet away, Eowyn could see the blue tinge to his lips. For a moment, she froze. She had seen beggars before, of course. They were everywhere in Eldoria, especially in the countryside, where the gap between rich and poor was so vast, it might as well have been a chasm. Some were genuine, desperate people who had fallen on hard times. Others were tricksters, pretending to be worse off than they were in the hopes of extracting coin from the kind-hearted. But this man looked like he was dying. Eowyn knew she should ignore him. She knew that drawing attention to herself was dangerous. She knew that if Lord Cedric or one of the other higher servants saw her helping a beggar, she would be punished. She knew all of this. And yet, she could not walk away. Because she remembered her father kneeling in the mud. She remembered the landlord looking down at him with cold, empty eyes. She remembered the terrible silence that had fallen over the world when the light had left her father's face. She remembered the horror of being looked at and seen as nothing. And she swore to herself, in that moment, that she would never become the kind of person who could look at another human being and feel nothing. She set down the firewood and approached the figure slowly, carefully. "Sir," she said softly. "Sir, are you all right?" The man stirred, a faint movement that was barely perceptible. He raised his head, and Eowyn got her first real look at his face. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with sharp, aristocratic features that seemed oddly out of place on his ragged frame. His eyes, even in their haze of exhaustion, were a striking shade of gray, almost silver in the dim light. He tried to speak, but only a rasping cough came out. Eowyn's heart clenched. She had seen people die before. She knew the signs. The gray pallor of the skin, the rattling breath, the distant, fading look in the eyes. This man was on the edge. And even though she knew better, even though every instinct screamed at her to protect herself, she made a decision. "You cannot stay here," she said, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "It's too cold, and you're soaked through. You'll die if you spend the night out here." The man's lips moved. but no sound came out. "Can you stand?" she asked. He shook his head weakly. Elowen bit her lip, her mind racing. She knew she should go inside and pretend she had seen nothing. She knew the most sensible thing to do was to pretend this man didn't exist. But she also knew that if she walked away, she would never be able to forgive herself. She would see his face every night when she closed her eyes. She would hear the rattle in his breath. She would remember that she had had the power to help him and had chosen not to. "Wait here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be right back." She hurried inside, her heart pounding. The servants' entrance led into a narrow corridor that connected the kitchens to the scullery and the laundry. At this hour, the corridor was empty, which was fortunate, because Elowen had no idea what she would say if someone caught her. She ducked into the kitchen, grabbing a bowl of the leftover stew that the cook had set aside for the servants' dinner. She also grabbed a heel of bread, some water, and a blanket she had found hanging on a hook. Then, clutching her meager supplies to her chest, she slipped back out into the rain. The man hadn't moved. If anything, he looked even worse than before, his head lolling to the side and his eyes half closed. "Here," Elowen said, kneeling beside him. "Drink this. It will warm you." She held the water to his lips, and he managed to take a few sips. The color returned to his face slightly, and he blinked, focusing on her. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse and cracked. "Don't thank me yet," she said briskly, trying to hide her nervousness. "You need proper food and rest, and I can only give you what I have. But you can take this bread and stew, and you can have this blanket." His eyes, those fascinating gray eyes, studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He seemed to be trying to understand something, some mystery that only he could see. "You work here?" he asked. "I'm a maid," she said shortly. "Not that it matters. What matters is that you get somewhere warm before you freeze to death. Do you have anywhere to go? A family? A friend?" He shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "No, no one. I was hoping to find work, but no one will take me." Elowen could believe that. His appearance alone would have turned away any employer worth their salt. Even if he had been the most skilled laborer in the kingdom, no one would have given him a chance looking the way he did. She closed her eyes, wrestling with herself. She knew she shouldn't do this. It was madness. It was dangerous. It would get her fired at best and thrown in the stocks at worst. But when she opened her eyes, she knew what she had to do. "I have a room," she said slowly. "It's not much, just a tiny attic room with barely enough space for one person. But it has a lock, and it's dry. You can stay there tonight, just one night, and then you'll have to move on. Do you understand?" The man stared at her, his expression completely unreadable. "You would do that for me?" he asked. "You would risk your position for a stranger?" Elowen shrugged, pretending it was no big deal. She had become very good at pretending over the years. "You needed help," she said simply. "And I was here. That's all." The man opened his mouth, as if to say something else, but he was interrupted by a sudden fit of coughing that racked his entire body. Elowen's resolve hardened. "Come on," she said, slipping her arm around his shoulders and hauling him to his feet. "Let's get you inside before someone sees us." Getting him up to her room was a nightmare. The servants' stairs were narrow and steep, and the man was barely able to stand, let alone climb. Elowen half carried him, half dragged him up 2 flights of stairs, praying the entire time that they wouldn't run into anyone. They didn't. The attic was silent when they finally reached it, the other maids still busy with their duties. Elowen's room was at the very end of the corridor, a tiny cubicle with a narrow bed, a rickety wardrobe, and a small window that looked out over the estate's gardens. She eased the man onto her bed, the only place to sit, and quickly drew the curtains across the window. Then she locked the door and turned to face him. "You can't stay long," she said, her voice brisk. "But you can rest here for the night. I'll bring you some more food and water when I can." The man looked around the room, his expression unreadable. His eyes lingered on the sparse furnishings, the threadbare blanket, the faded wallpaper that was peeling at the edges. Then he looked back at Elowen, and she saw something flash in those gray eyes, something that looked almost like shock. "You sleep here?" he asked. "Where else would I sleep?" she replied, a bit sharply. I assumed the servants' quarters were more comfortable?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You assumed wrong. This is all I have, but it's more than you have, and I can spare it for one night." She pulled the blanket she had taken from the kitchen from under her arm and held it out to him. "Here, use this. I will fetch you something to eat and drink as soon as I can get away. But you must promise me one thing." "What's that?" he asked, his voice still hoarse. "You must be gone by dawn," Elowen said firmly. "I'm taking a terrible risk by letting you stay here. If anyone finds out, if Lord Cedric finds out, I will be dismissed. Probably worse." She could see him processing this information. He reached for the blanket, holding it as if it were made of silk instead of rough wool. His fingers were long and slender, the hands of someone who had never done manual labor, but they were also calloused in strange places, covered with the kind of blisters that came from gripping a sword. "So your master would punish you for showing kindness," he said slowly. Elowen snorted. "My master doesn't care about kindness. He cares about order, discipline, reputation. A servant who smuggles a beggar into the house is a servant who cannot be trusted. That's all he would see." "And what do you see?" the man asked, his voice low. She met his gaze. "I see someone who needs help," she said. "That's all. That's all I need to see." Elowen was awake long before dawn the next morning, her body aching from a night spent sleeping on the cold floor. She had given the man her bed and had taken the floor herself, using a thin pillow and a threadbare blanket that she had forgotten she owned. She slipped out of the room as quietly as she could, her heart racing. The man was still sleeping, his breathing deep and even. She had left a small loaf of bread and a jug of water on the nightstand, and she hoped he would remember her warning and leave before the household woke up. She had no idea if he would. She spent the morning in a state of nervous agitation, scrubbing floors and polishing silver with the kind of manic energy that she usually reserved for avoiding her own thoughts. Every time the door opened, she braced herself for the discovery. Every time she heard footsteps in the corridor, she expected them to lead to her room. But nothing happened. No one came for her. No one accused her of hiding a beggar. No one seemed to have noticed anything at all. When Elowen finally managed to slip away to the attic at midday, the room was empty. The man had left, as she had asked. The bread and water were gone. The blanket was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. And there, sitting on the nightstand, was a small piece of paper with a message written in precise, elegant handwriting. "Thank you for your kindness, Elowen. I have not forgotten it. I will find a way to repay you." She stared at the note, a strange feeling stirring in her chest. She didn't know why, but she believed him. There was something about the man, something about his eyes, his voice, his quiet intensity, that told her he meant every word. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her apron, where no one would find it. She did not expect to see him again. She could not have been more wrong. 3 days later, the Duke of Evermont returned to his estate. His arrival was marked by a flurry of activity that swept through the manor like a hurricane. Servants scrambled to prepare his apartments, to air out his clothes, to ensure that every last detail was perfect. The cook prepared a feast, The butler ordered the silver polished, and the candelabras lit. The entire household fell into a frenzy of preparation that left Elowen exhausted and more than a little annoyed. She had never met the Duke, and she had no desire to. In her experience, aristocrats were the same everywhere, demanding, condescending, and utterly oblivious to the lives of the people who served them. But something about the Duke's return felt different. There were whispers in the servants' quarters, rumors that the Duke had been traveling incognito, investigating the state of his estates and the behavior of his officials. No one knew where he had been or what he had seen, but the tension in the air was palpable, and even the most senior servants seemed on edge. Lord Cedric Vane, the estate steward, had been pacing the corridors for days, his face pale and his hands trembling. Elowen had never seen him so agitated, and she wondered what he had to fear. The evening of the Duke's return, the manor was ablaze with candles, and the great hall was packed with guests. Elowen had been assigned to serve at the feast, a prestigious duty that meant she would be visible to the aristocrats and would have to maintain a perfect servant's pose for hours on end. She had been in the great hall only once before, and the grandeur of it still took her breath away. The ceiling was vaulted, with painted frescoes depicting scenes from ancient mythology. The walls were lined with tapestries and portraits of the Duke's ancestors. The table was so long that she could barely see the end of it, covered in fine white linen and laden with silver platters and crystal goblets. The guests were equally magnificent, dressed in silks and velvets, their jewels sparkling in the candlelight. They laughed and chattered, their voices a melodic hum that filled the air with a sense of effortless sophistication. Elowen hated them all. She hated the way they looked past her, as if she were invisible. She hated the way they dropped their napkins and expected her to retrieve them without a word of thanks. She hated the way they complained about the food, the wine, the temperature of the room, as if their every whim was the most important thing in the world. But most of all, she hated herself for being here, for serving them, for being too afraid to do anything else. And then, the Duke entered the room. He walked in through the main doors, flanked by his personal servants, and the entire room fell silent. The guests rose from their seats, their faces turned toward the man who held their lives in his hands. Elowen's breath caught in her throat, because she knew that face. She knew those gray eyes. She knew that sharp jaw, that aristocratic nose, that hair that was dark and slightly disheveled, even in the midst of a state occasion. She had seen that face just 3 nights ago, pale with exhaustion, streaked with dirt and rain, staring up at her from the cold stone floor of the servants' quarters. The Duke of Evermont was the beggar she had saved. Her world tilted on its axis. She felt the blood drain from her face, and she knew she must look deathly pale, but she could not help it. She was staring at him, her mouth open, her hands frozen in the act of pouring wine. And then he looked at her. His eyes met hers across the room, and for a moment, everything else faded away. She saw recognition in his gaze, not surprise, not shock, but a quiet, knowing acknowledgement. He remembered her. He remembered everything. And then he smiled. It was a small smile, barely a curve of his lips, but it was unmistakable. A private smile, shared between them alone, in the middle of a room filled with hundreds of people. Elowen's heart was pounding so hard she could hardly breathe. She was saved from her panic by the butler's announcement, which called everyone to order. The Duke took his seat at the head of the table, and the feast began. But Elowen could not focus on anything except him. She watched him as he moved through the evening, his manner polished and gracious, his conversation witty and engaging. He was everything a duke should be, charming, cultured, effortlessly commanding. He joked with the guests, listened attentively to their stories, and charmed them all, without seeming to try. But she saw something beneath the surface. She saw the awareness in his eyes, the way his gaze kept flicking toward her. She saw the way his expression hardened when Lord Cedric Vane spoke, the way his jaw tightened and his eyes grew cold. She saw the way he asked questions that seemed innocent, but were actually probing, searching for cracks in the armor of the people around him. She saw the man she had helped, the man who had trembled with cold in the rain, the man who had accepted her meager offerings with such quiet gratitude. And she felt something shift inside her, something she was afraid to name. The feast ended in the early hours of the morning, and Eowyn made her way back to her attic room in a daze. She was so tired that her legs felt like lead, and her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and something that felt dangerously like hope. The Duke was the beggar. She had helped the Duke. She had given him food and water and her own bed. She had risked her position, her livelihood, everything she had, for a man who turned out to be the wealthiest, most powerful person in the kingdom. She felt a surge of anger, hot and bitter, rising in her chest. He had lied to her. He had manipulated her. He had let her believe he was something he was not, and she had given him her kindness, her compassion, her trust. And for what? So he could test her? So he could see if she was worthy? So he could prove that she was just as greedy and self-interested as everyone else? She flung herself onto her bed, burying her face in her pillow, and let out a frustrated scream. But beneath the anger, there was something else, something she did not want to admit. She remembered his eyes, the way they had looked at her in that moment of recognition. She remembered his smile, the quiet gratitude that had been so pure, so unpretentious. She remembered the note he had left her, the promise he had made. "I will find a way to repay you." She had thought it was just a polite sentiment, the kind of thing anyone might say. But now she knew better. He had meant it. And suddenly, Eowyn did not know what to think. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to sort through the tangle of emotions that was churning inside her. She was angry, yes. She had every right to be angry. He had deceived her. He had let her make a fool of herself. But he had also shown her something that no one else ever had. He had shown her that he saw her, not as a servant, not as an invisible nonentity, but as a person, a real person with thoughts and feelings and a life of her own. And that mattered. It mattered more than she wanted it to. The next morning, Eowyn was summoned to the Duke's private study. She had been expecting it, in a way. She had known, from the moment she had seen him at the feast, that this conversation would have to happen. But knowing something in your head and accepting it in your heart were two very different things. She stood outside the heavy oak door, her hands trembling slightly, and tried to calm her racing heart. She had never been in the Duke's study before. She had never even seen it. It was a private chamber, reserved for the Duke alone, and no servant below the rank of valet had any business being there. But she was being summoned, and that could only mean one thing. She raised her hand and knocked. "Enter," came the voice from inside. She pushed open the door and stepped into the room. It was smaller than she had expected, more intimate, with walls lined with bookshelves and a large desk placed in front of a window that overlooked the gardens. The room was warm, a fire crackling in the hearth, and the morning light streamed through the glass, casting golden patterns on the floor. The Duke was standing by the window, his back to her. He was dressed in a simple dark coat and breeches, his clothing far more casual than the elaborate attire he had worn the night before. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it, and his posture was tense. Eowyn stood just inside the doorway, waiting. He turned to face her, and their eyes met. "Eowyn," he said, and there was something in his voice that she had not expected. something that sounded almost like vulnerability. "Thank you for coming." She curtsied, her body responding automatically, but she did not lower her gaze. "You wish to see me, Your Grace." "Please," he said, gesturing toward a chair. "Sit." She hesitated, but the look in his eyes was so earnest, so genuine, that she found herself obeying. She perched on the edge of the chair, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. "First," he said, settling into the chair across from her, "I want to apologize." "Apologize?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "For what? For pretending to be a beggar? For lying to me? For letting me believe you were someone you weren't?" He flinched at her tone, but did not look away. "Yes, for all of that, and more." She stared at him, her anger warring with her confusion. "Why did you do it? Why did you pretend?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I needed to see the truth," he said. "I had heard rumors that the steward of my estate, Lord Cedric Vane, was exploiting the tenants and stealing from my coffers. I had heard whispers that the people on my lands were suffering, that they were being treated cruelly by the very people who were supposed to serve them. But I did not know if those rumors were true. I could not trust what I was told by my officials, because they were the ones who stood to benefit from the lies." He paused, his gray eyes searching her face. "So I decided to see for myself," he continued. "I left my estate dressed in rags and traveled through the countryside, looking at my lands through the eyes of a poor man. I wanted to see how my people were truly treated, not when the Duke was watching, but when no one was watching at all." "And what did you discover?" Eowyn asked, her voice cold. His expression darkened. "I discovered that the rumors were worse than I had feared. Lord Cedric has been stealing from my tenants for years. He has been raising their rents, blaming me for the increases, and pocketing the difference. He has been driving families off their land, taking their homes and their livelihoods, all in the name of enriching himself." "Then why did you not simply confront him?" Eowyn demanded. "Why did you have to deceive me?" "Because I needed to know if anyone could be trusted," he said, his voice soft. "I had spent so long surrounded by people who lied to me, who flattered me, and manipulated me, and told me exactly what they thought I wanted to hear. I had forgotten what real kindness looked like. I had forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a human being, rather than a title." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something she had never expected to see in a duke: humility. "You showed me that kindness," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You, who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, looked at a stranger in the rain and chose to help him. You gave him food and shelter and warmth, without asking for anything in return. You showed me that I had been wrong about the world, that there are people who still believe in compassion, that I could still be worthy of it." Eowyn's throat felt tight, and she had to swallow before she could speak. You knew who I was. You knew I worked here. Why did you not reveal yourself?" "Because I did not want to taint the moment," he said simply. "I wanted to remember it exactly as it was, a stranger helping another stranger, not a servant helping her master. I wanted to see if your kindness would be the same if you knew who I was." "And was it?" she asked, her voice hardly above a whisper. He shook his head slowly. "No, it was better, because you showed me that the kind of person you are does not depend on the person you are helping. You would have done the same for anyone. That is who you are." Eowyn felt her eyes sting with tears. She blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of him. "Your Grace," she began, but he interrupted her. "Please," he said, "call me Alaric. When we are alone, I want you to call me Alaric." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I cannot call you that. You are the Duke. I am a maid. There is a vast distance between us, and nothing you say can change that." "There is no distance," he said, his voice fierce. "Not between us. You saved my life, Elowen. You gave me back something I had lost, faith in humanity. You cannot tell me that means nothing." "I am not saying it means nothing," she replied, her voice trembling. "I am saying that it changes nothing. You are still a duke, and I am still a servant. That will never change." "Why does it have to define us?" he asked, and she heard the raw emotion in his voice. "Why does a title matter more than a person's character? Why does your position matter more than your heart?" Elowen looked away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. "Because the world says it does. Because people like Lord Cedric will never let us forget it. Because you have a duty to marry someone of your own station, someone who will help you secure your legacy, not someone who will drag your reputation down." "What if I do not care about my reputation?" he asked. "What if I care about you?" She turned back to him, her eyes wide with shock. You cannot mean that." "I mean every word," he said, and she could see the truth of it in his eyes. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who only wanted what I could give them: money, power, protection. You are the first person who ever gave me something without expecting anything in return. You are the first person who ever saw me as a person, not a title. You are the first person who made me want to be worthy of someone." Elowen's heart was pounding so loudly that she could hardly hear her own thoughts. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man she had seen in the rain was the real him, not the duke, not the aristocrat, but the man who had been so desperate and so lost that he had needed a stranger's kindness to survive. But she had been hurt before. She had been betrayed by people she had trusted, people who had looked at her and seen nothing worth saving. She had learned to protect herself, to keep people at a distance, to never let anyone close enough to hurt her. And this man, this duke, was the most dangerous person of all, because he had the power to break her completely. Weeks passed. Elowen continued to work at the manor, but everything had changed. The duke, Elaric, was constantly seeking her out. He found excuses to visit the kitchens, to walk through the servants' corridors, to be anywhere that she might be. He spoke to her in private moments, stealing precious seconds of conversation in between her duties. And every time he did, she felt her defenses weakening. He was not what she had expected. He was not cold or condescending or entitled. He was kind, genuinely kind, with a warmth and humility that seemed utterly at odds with his position. He asked her about her life, about her family, her dreams, her fears. He listened to her answers, truly listened, and she saw the empathy in his eyes. He told her about his own life, about the loneliness of being a duke, about the constant pressure to be perfect, to never show weakness, to always present the face that the world expected. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was young, and his father, who had been distant and demanding. He told her about the weight of expectation that had been placed on his shoulders from the moment he was born. And Elowen began to understand. She began to see the cracks in his armor, the vulnerability beneath the title. She began to see the boy who had grown up in a world of privilege and isolation, surrounded by people who only wanted what he could give them. She began to see the man who was desperate to be loved for himself, not for his rank. And she realized, with a sinking feeling in her heart, that she was falling in love with him. It was a dangerous thing, loving a duke. It was a foolish thing, loving a man who could never truly be hers. But Elowen could not help herself. Every time she saw him, her heart fluttered. Every time he smiled at her, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. Every time he spoke her name, she wanted to cry with joy and despair. She knew she should pull away. She knew she should protect herself, keep her distance, remember her place. But she could not. And that was when the first twist came. Lord Cedric Vane had been watching. He had seen the way the Duke looked at the maid, the way he sought her out, the way he smiled at her. He had seen the intimacy between them, the way they spoke to each other, as if no one else existed. And he had seen an opportunity. Lord Cedric was an ambitious man. He had risen through the ranks of the Evermont household through a combination of cunning, flattery, and sheer ruthlessness. He had stolen from the estate for years, enriching himself at the expense of the tenants, and he had always believed himself clever enough to avoid detection. But now, he was afraid. He had heard rumors that the Duke was investigating the estate's finances, that he was asking questions and looking at records. He knew that if the truth came out, he would be ruined. He would be stripped of his position, his wealth, his status. He might even be arrested. He needed a way to protect himself. He needed leverage. And Elowen Hartwell was the key. It was a rainy afternoon when Lord Cedric cornered Elowen in the laundry room. She had been alone, sorting through a pile of linens, when he had appeared in the doorway. His smile was smooth, his manner polished, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "Elowen," he said, his voice dripping with false pleasantness, "I have been looking for you." She straightened, her body tensing with wariness. "My lord? Is something amiss?" "Not at all," he said, stepping closer. "I merely wanted to have a conversation with you." A private conversation. Elowen's heart began to race. She did not trust Lord Cedric. She had seen the way he treated the tenants, the way he looked at people, as if they were merely tools to be used and discarded. She knew that he was a dangerous man, and she did not want to be alone with him. I have work to do," she said, trying to edge past him. "Perhaps we could speak later." "I think we should speak now," he said, his hand shooting out to grip her arm. His grip was like iron, and she could not escape. "You see, I have noticed something rather interesting. Something about you and His Grace." Elowen froze, her blood turning to ice. "I do not know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I think you do," he said, his smile widening. "I have seen the way he looks at you. I have seen the way you look at him, and I have to admit, I find it rather amusing. The mighty Duke of Evermont, falling for a maid. How scandalous." "There is nothing between us," she said, her voice shaking. "You are mistaken." "Am I?" he asked, his grip tightening. "Then why have I seen him sneaking off to speak with you in private? Why have I seen the way he watches you across the room? Why have I heard the whispers among the servants?" Elowen's heart was pounding so loudly, she could hardly think. She knew that Lord Cedric was a manipulator, a liar, a man who would do anything to get what he wanted. She knew that he was trying to intimidate her, but she also knew that he was dangerous. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Simple," he said, releasing her arm. "I want you to help me." "Help you with what?" "I know that His Grace is investigating me," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know that he is looking for evidence against me, evidence that would ruin me. I need you to find out what he knows. I need you to tell me." Elowen stared at him, horrified. "You want me to spy on the Duke?" "I want you to help me," he said smoothly. "If you do, I will make it worth your while. Money. A position in a fine household. Anything you want. And if you do not—" He paused, his smile turning cold. "If you do not, I will make sure that everyone knows about your little affair with the Duke. I will make sure that his reputation is destroyed. I will make sure that you are publicly shamed, turned out of your position, and forced to live on the streets." Elowen felt the world tilt beneath her feet. You would not do that. You cannot prove anything. I do not need to prove it, he said, his voice silky. I only need to spread the rumors. And you know how quickly rumors spread in a house like this. The Duke's reputation would be in tatters, and you would be ruined. Is that really what you want? Elowyn felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Lord Cedric the satisfaction of seeing her cry. I cannot help you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I will not betray him. His smile vanished. Then you will learn what it means to cross me, he hissed. I will destroy you. I will destroy everything you love, and when you are broken and alone, I will make sure that you have nothing left to hold on to. He turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving Elowyn standing there, shaking with fear. She knew that she should tell the Duke. She knew that Lord Cedric was a threat to everything she held dear. But she also knew that if she told the Duke, he would confront Cedric, and the confrontation could lead to a scandal that would destroy them both. She was trapped. Trapped between her loyalty to Alaric and her fear of Lord Cedric. Trapped between her love for the Duke and her knowledge that a relationship between them was impossible. And for the first time in her life, Elowyn did not know what to do. The next few weeks were the most agonizing of Elowyn's life. She continued to work, continued to smile, continued to pretend that everything was normal. But inside, she was falling apart. She could not sleep. She could not eat. She could not stop thinking about Lord Cedric's threats, about what he would do to her, and to Alaric. She wanted to tell Alaric. She wanted to run to him and throw herself at his feet and beg him to protect her. But she was afraid. Afraid of what he would think of her. Afraid of the scandal that would follow. Afraid of losing him forever. And so she said nothing. But Alaric noticed something was wrong. He had always been perceptive, and he had come to know Elowyn well over the weeks they had spent together. He could see the shadows under her eyes, the way she flinched at unexpected sounds, the way she seemed to be constantly looking over her shoulder. He tried to ask her what was wrong, but she deflected his questions, offering excuses and lies that he could see through easily. He tried to reach out to her, to comfort her, but she pulled away, creating a distance between them that had never been there before. And he began to worry. He began to wonder if she had changed her mind about him, if she had decided that a relationship with a duke was too dangerous, too impossible. He began to fear that he was losing her, that the connection they had built was slipping away. And it broke his heart. He had never felt this way about anyone. He had never met someone who made him feel so alive, so hopeful, so determined to be a better man. He had never met someone who made him want to change the world, to right the wrongs he had ignored for so long. And now, he was losing her. He needed to find out what was wrong. The opportunity came one evening, when Elowyn was working late in the library, dusting the shelves and organizing the books. Alaric found her there, alone, and his heart ached at the sight of her. She looked so weary, so fragile, so utterly defeated. "Elowyn," he said softly, and she whirled around, her eyes wide with shock. "Your Grace," she said, her voice trembling. I did not expect to see you here. I came looking for you," he said, stepping closer. "I have been worried about you, Elowyn. You seem so troubled lately. Please, tell me what is wrong." She shook her head, her eyes glistening with tears. "I cannot. I am sorry, but I cannot." "Elowyn," he said, his voice gentle, "whatever it is, we can face it together. You do not have to bear this burden alone." "You do not understand," she said, her voice breaking. "It is because of you. Everything is because of you. I am so afraid, Alaric. I am so afraid of losing everything." He reached out to her, cupping her cheek in his hand. "You will not lose anything," he said, his voice fierce. "I will not let anything happen to you. I will protect you." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "You cannot protect me from this. It is too big. It is too dangerous." "Then let me share the danger," he said. "Let me carry the burden with you. Whatever it is, we can find a way through it together." And then, the truth spilled out of her. She told him everything. About Lord Cedric's threats, about his demand that she spy on him, about his promise to destroy them both. She told him about the fear that had been eating away at her, the sleepless nights, the endless worry. She told him that she had been trying to protect him, to keep him safe, but that she had not known how. When she was finished, Alaric's face was grim. He took her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "Elowen, listen to me. Lord Cedric is a dangerous man, but he is not as powerful as he thinks he is. I have been gathering evidence against him for weeks. I know everything he has done. The theft, the deception, the cruelty. He is a criminal, and he will be punished." "But what about the rumors?" she asked, her voice small. "What about the scandal?" "I will not let that happen," he said firmly. "I will not let anyone hurt you. I will protect you, Elowen. I swear it." But Lord Cedric was not a man who gave up easily. When he learned that Elowen had told the Duke everything, he was furious. He knew that his position was untenable, that he would be exposed and ruined. But he was not going to go down alone. He had one last card to play. He would expose the Duke's relationship with the Maid. He would spread the rumors, destroy Alaric's reputation, and make sure that the Duke suffered as much as he was about to suffer. He would burn everything down. The rumors began within a week. They started in the servants' quarters, as all good gossip does. Someone had seen the Duke in the library with Elowen, their hands intertwined. Someone else had seen them embracing in the garden. Soon, the whispers were everywhere, spreading like wildfire through the household. And then, the scandal broke. The local newspapers got wind of it. The story was sensational. A duke and a servant, an illicit affair, a secret romance. It was the kind of story that sold papers, that titillated the masses, that destroyed the lives of everyone involved. The Duke's reputation was in ruins. His peers mocked him, his allies abandoned him, and his family was horrified. He was summoned before the king himself, who demanded an explanation for the scandal. And Elowen, poor, innocent Elowen, was vilified in the press. She was called a gold digger, a schemer, a woman who had used her wiles to ensnare a duke. Her name was dragged through the mud, her character questioned, her reputation destroyed. She knew that she had to leave. There was no other choice. She could not stay, could not continue to be the cause of Alaric's ruin. She packed her few belongings and made her way to the servants' entrance, determined to disappear into the night. But she did not get very far. Alaric was waiting for her. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice calm. "Away," she said, unable to meet his eyes. "Far away. I cannot stay. I am ruining you." "Elowen," he said, stepping in front of her. "You are not ruining me. You are saving me." She looked up, startled, and saw the truth in his eyes. "Lord Cedric is responsible for this," he said. "He orchestrated the rumors, spread the lies, made sure the newspapers got hold of the story. He is trying to destroy us both." "And he is succeeding," Elowen said bitterly. "Everyone hates me. Everyone thinks I am a scheming, manipulative woman who seduced you for your wealth and title. Your reputation is ruined. Your family has disowned you. How can you possibly say that this is a good thing?" "Because I have finally learned the truth," he said, taking her hands in his. "I have learned who my true friends are. I have learned who I can trust. And I have learned that you are more important to me than everything else." "The scandal," she began. is temporary, he said firmly. It will pass, but my love for you will not. She stared at him, unable to speak. I love you, Elowen, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I have loved you from the moment you gave me that bread in the rain. You showed me what kindness truly looks like. You showed me what it means to be a good person. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I am worthy of your love. She felt her eyes fill with tears. I am not worthy of you, she whispered. Elowen, he said, tilting her chin up so that she was forced to meet his gaze. You are the most worthy person I have ever known. You are kind and brave and selfless. You are everything that is good in this world, and I will not let you go. But the story was not over. There was a final twist, a revelation that would change everything. Alaric had been investigating Lord Cedric's crimes, and he had discovered something that would shock everyone, something that related directly to Elowen. Her father had worked on the Evermont estate before his death. He had been one of Cedric's victims, a tenant who had been driven off his land after being falsely accused of theft. The accusation had been a lie, a way for Cedric to steal the land and sell it for his own profit. And when Elowen's father had tried to fight back, Cedric had crushed him. Cedric had been the man who had ruined Elowen's family. Cedric had been the man who had driven her father to his death. And Alaric, the Duke, the man she had fallen in love with, was the master of the estate that had destroyed her family. When she learned the truth, Elowen was devastated. She loved Alaric. She truly loved him. But how could she be with him when his estate, his family, his very name had caused her family so much pain? She retreated from him, pulling away, unable to bear the weight of the revelation. She could not look at him without seeing her father's face, without hearing his desperate cries for mercy, without feeling the agony of his loss. I cannot do this, she told him, her voice hollow. I cannot be with you. It would be a betrayal of everything I have ever believed in. Elowen, he said, his voice aching with pain. I know what my family did to yours. I know that Lord Cedric is the one responsible. But I am not him. I am not my family. I am not the man who hurt your father. You are the master of the estate that allowed it, she said bitterly. You are the one who profited from his suffering. I did not know, he said, his voice breaking. I swear to you, I did not know. I was a child when it happened. I had no control over the estate. But I am in control now, and I am going to make it right. I am going to expose Cedric. I am going to make sure that he pays for what he did, and I am going to dedicate my life to making sure that nothing like this ever happens again. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. How can I trust you? How can I believe that you will keep your word? Because I love you, he said simply. Because you have shown me what it means to be a good person, and I want to be that person for you. Not because of my title, not because of my wealth, but because of who I am when I am with you. Elowen stared at him, her heart in turmoil. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, but the wound was too deep, too raw. I need time, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to think. And she walked away. The final confrontation with Lord Cedric came a week later. Alaric had gathered all the evidence he needed, the accounts, the testimony, the proof of Cedric's crimes. He had summoned Cedric to his study, and he had laid it all out in front of him. You have stolen from my estate for years, Alaric said, his voice cold. You have driven families off their land, including the family of a woman I love. You have lied and cheated and manipulated your way to power, and you have destroyed lives in the process. Lord Cedric's face was pale, his expression defiant. You cannot prove anything. These documents could be forged. The testimony is nothing but hearsay. I have proof, Alaric said, holding up a ledger. This is a record of every penny you have stolen. It has your signature on it, and I have witnesses who will testify against you." Cedric's composure finally cracked. "You will ruin me." "You have ruined yourself," Alaric said. "But I am willing to make you an offer. Confess your crimes publicly, and I will ensure that you are allowed to leave Eldoria without being prosecuted. You will be exiled, and you will never return. If you refuse, I will see you in court, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison." Cedric looked at him, his face twisted with hatred. "You think you have won? You think this is over? I may be ruined, but I will take you down with me. You and your little maid." "You will do nothing of the sort," Alaric said calmly, "because I have already taken steps to ensure that the truth comes out. The evidence has been shared with the authorities. Your crimes will be exposed, and the people you have wronged will finally receive justice, including Elwyn Hartwell." Cedric's face contorted with rage. "I should have destroyed her when I had the chance." "That is precisely why you will be leaving tonight," Alaric said, rising to his feet. "I have arranged for a carriage to take you to the coast. You will board a ship and never set foot on Eldorian soil again. If you resist, I will have you arrested." The carriage left before midnight, carrying Lord Cedric Vane into exile. The estate was quiet, the crisis over, and Alaric sat alone in his study, staring into the fire. He had won. He had defeated Cedric, exposed his crimes, and freed the estate from his corruption. But he had lost Elwyn, and without her, victory felt hollow. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he said, expecting a servant. The door opened, and Elwyn stepped inside. She looked pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying, but there was a determination in her expression that made his heart ache. "Elwyn," he said, rising to his feet. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady. "I have something I need to say." He nodded, his heart pounding. "I have spent the past week thinking about everything," she said. "About what Lord Cedric did to my family, about what you did to stop him, and I have come to a conclusion." She took a deep breath. "You are not your family," she said. "You are not Lord Cedric. You are a good man, a man who is trying to do the right thing, and I cannot hold you responsible for the sins of others." "Elwyn," he began. "Let me finish," she said, holding up a hand. "I have also realized that I cannot live my life in fear. I cannot let the past define me. I cannot let the pain of what happened to my father prevent me from finding happiness." She stepped closer to him, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "I love you, and I cannot imagine my life without you." Alaric felt his heart soar. He crossed the room in 2 swift strides and took her in his arms. "I love you too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have loved you from the moment you gave me that bread in the rain. You saved my life, Elwyn. You saved me." She laughed through her tears. "I did not do anything special. I just gave you some food and a place to sleep." "To me, it was everything," he said. "It was the first time someone had shown me kindness without expecting anything in return. It was the first time someone saw me as a person, not a title, and it changed my life." 2 years later, the Duke of Evermont married Elwyn Hartwell in a ceremony that shocked the kingdom. The newspapers were full of scandalous headlines. The aristocrats were horrified. The king himself was displeased. But Alaric did not care. He had spent the past 2 years proving himself worthy of Elwyn's love. He had reduced the rents on his estates, established a fund for struggling families, and personally listened to the people living on his lands. He had exposed the corruption that had plagued his household and made sure that justice was served. And Elwyn, his Elwyn, had become a leader in her own right. She had taken charge of the estate's charity programs, using her own experiences to help others who had suffered as she had. She had become a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the poor, a symbol of hope for everyone who had ever been told they were not good enough. Their marriage was not easy. There were always people who looked down on Elowen because of her humble origins. There were always those who whispered about her behind her back. But they faced it together, their love growing stronger with each challenge. And on the day of their wedding, as Alaric looked into Elowen's eyes and made his vows, he knew that he had found the greatest treasure of all. Not his title, not his wealth, not his estates, but a woman who had taught him that true nobility was not inherited. It was earned through compassion, humility, and the way we treat people who have nothing to give us in return. "Elowen," he said, his voice carrying across the church, "I promised you that I would spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you, and I intend to keep that promise." Elowen smiled, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "I know," she said, "and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you." And as they kissed, the entire congregation erupted into applause, and even the most cynical onlookers could not help but be moved by the pure, undeniable power of their love. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that kindness should never depend on who is watching, then please, take a moment to share this story with someone who needs to hear it. One small act of kindness changed the Duke's entire world. Your share could change someone else's too. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of love, redemption, and the power of compassion. And remember, true nobility is not found in titles. It is found in how we treat those who have nothing to give us in return. I'll see you in the next story.